Many of us live a grocery store kind of faith, a faith that is surrounded with bright lights that make us feel happier, a place where there maybe is all sorts of sugary or high fructose corn syrup additives that help us to crash after we indulge, or perhaps just a type of faith where we're a consumer just merely passing through. If you didn't know, the grocery stores in the United States and abroad are largely also built upon principles from psychology. They are meant to keep you there longer, to make you feel happier there, and to spend a little bit more on what you weren't planning to or that wasn't on the list. I think sometimes in the same way, our faith is about rhythm, about crash diets, about attendance more than digging deep and tending to the dramas of death and life, of story and soil. As we'll discover in Jesus' parable today about the sower and the seeds, Jesus invites us into the toil and care of the raised beds of our soils and souls. The parable of the sower is about long-term formation and growth, not a fast food diet or a grocery cart style of faith. Now, before we get too far, a few months ago, you may remember that I promised not to give you a boring lecture again. And I'm going to hold to that pinky promise, a solemn oath. And so what I wanted to invite you to do throughout this sermon that we're all participating in is you're going to go up like it's a fourth grade science class, and you're going to fill a cup with soil and either a pepper seedling or some of our beans that are seedlings, that will grow into seedlings. And you're going to take that home and put it on your best windowsill, whether it's in your house or apartment or porch. And you're going to tend to that plant for the rest of the week and hopefully longer. And this is not for people who like to say, but I don't have a green thumb. It doesn't matter. You can learn something good from participating in gardening and growth. So as we go, I just want you to get up from your seat, especially if you're about to get bored or fall asleep. That's a great time to go and fill this. Or if you just see the laps like it's a wedding buffet, quickly make that time up there to go and fill it. I'm going to need a few brave volunteers to get us started. But the idea came from, as you'll see, there's a Lowe's bucket over here full of plants. We have been giving out seedlings to our neighbors, which has been really exciting. I think this battery must be dead. I had a great picture of one of our volunteers this week meeting a young girl whose grandmother brought us over and essentially just gave away a seedling for them to grow home tomato plants. Oh, we have it over here. So thanks, Cheryl, for being in that. But it's a great moment of sharing and sending home good things for people to grow in our neighborhood and to share when they have an abundance. Many of us are probably familiar with Jesus' parable of the sower. If we aren't, that's okay. I'm going to read it again. These are the words from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus said many things to a crowd in parables. Jesus says, "A farmer went out to scatter seed, and as she was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But then the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Still others fell among thorny plants, and the thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed, however, fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another, a yield of 60 to 1. And in yet another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention." Now, maybe to us, just like to Jesus' listeners, at first, the story seemed simple. If I'm a person of faith, I must be the one of the seeds that grew in good soil. Everyone else is not. Case closed. But what I think Jesus does when he says this parable is gets at something much deeper. Because I think that quick understanding doesn't do enough credit to the gospel and to our love of others. You see, Jesus grew up and lived in a world where people grew their own food. If they didn't grow their own food, their neighbor or family grew their own food. Food was largely regionally based. There wasn't Peapod to deliver to your home. Amazon Prime wasn't carting things at all speeds and also messing up your traffic. No, that was an unfair dig, maybe. People were in relationship with the food that was growing around them. They also had marketplaces where meat and vegetables were from the area were being sold and traded. There was a sense that food grew around and with you. And if you didn't know, in the United States, it takes about 1,500 miles from your food to get from where it's grown to the factories to your table. Do we want a kind of faith that eats up creation at large? Or do we want to have a faith that will grow good and great things? I think as people of faith, we need to plant good heirloom and delicious and diverse seeds in rich, dark brown soil. And as a quick side note, in Genesis 3, we have the story of Adam, the Adam in Hebrew, which is probably best translated as the dirt man, someone made out of soil. There's a sense that the first people that God creates are deeply connected to the ground that they work. And that good soil makes good people. Good soil makes good and healthy food. And what I thought about doing originally with this was not just having you fill it with good soil. I thought about putting it under certain seats, and then some of you were going to get rocks, some of you sand, some of you water. But that felt like a very cruel and unusual experiment. The idea is that what you plant in is going to have a great effect on what you grow. What you plant will help you to dig deeper roots of faith. I recently saw this short documentary by Vice News, and it shared the story of Peace Park in North Philly. It's a community garden and community connection place where people took an abandoned lot in a low-income neighborhood, invested their time and resources to grow something good. And quite honestly, it reminds me of what we're doing at Ray's Place. We're taking something that was abandoned and forgotten and making it something special, a place of connection and development, of growing good things. And what was so interesting to me in this short documentary is that the lead community organizer and gardener, Tommy Joshua, said this: a seed can't just be thrown anywhere. It has to be planted in a place that's conducive to its development. It'll take time so that you, the gardener, learn patience. You, the gardener, will learn how to focus. You, the gardener, learn how to care. The lessons that you, the gardener, learn in the garden, they travel back to our households and to our communities. And I think that's an often overlooked part of Jesus' parable. That when we place good seeds into good soil, it will make us more patient and loving people. We talk about the fruits of the Spirit all the time. We know these things because we put in the work to get them. And because we're people who believe the spiritual and material meet, that they are one and the same, we're able to grow good food and good faith at the same time. I think it's no coincidence that soil and soul are just a letter apart. You see, when we grow and dig in, we are able to develop better relationships that we take home to our community, that we take home to our households. So what I want you to do in the groups around you, if you're at home, please throw it in the chat. I want to ask this question: how have you been attending to your own spiritual soil? How are you taking care of your life and faith? I want you to answer that in your groups. You have 30 seconds. If you're at home, please throw it in the chat. Does anyone brave soul want to throw one out? Meditation? Prayer? The Bible app, great. Reading scripture. spending time in quiet and reflection in our lives that are always busier and busier and busier, getting involved, making connections with your neighbor. I just need one more and then we'll move on. And we're not moving on until I get that one. Podcasts. Okay, taking time to ingest and listen to other things and ideas. Maybe taking time to read. You see, these types of acts, when we're spending time with our neighbors, taking time for reflection, I think is living out this idea of taking care of the seedlings of faith in a garden of faith. You see, when you take these seedlings home, you're going to have to become more observant, or the project will fail. There's very few farmers, I don't think I've met any, who just put the corn in the ground and then come back in 6 months and just hope for the best. Right? We wouldn't have stable food in our country if that's what happened. You see, we can't neglect the good seedlings that we take root in good soil. We don't want things to just go to seed and be unusable. We want there to be an abundant harvest. We don't want things in our faith to rot on the vine from neglect. And truly, agriculture is about story and soil, about process, about constant crisis management, large and small. If we forget to water our souls and soils daily, or if we forget to take care and put fertilizer in so that we can grow better, we really will begin to struggle. If we don't respond and take time to observe the growing crises in our faith or in our gardens, we can find out that there'll be a much bigger problem down the road. About a month ago, I saw a film that radically changed my view about this parable. The film is called Minari. So tearjerker, if you're culpable to tears like me, it's going to be Waterworks, but it's an incredible film. It's the story about a South Korean immigrant family who's saved up all their money from working in factories in California, and they go to buy their first plot of land, a family farm in Arkansas. And they decide to grow heirloom vegetables that they can sell to Asian American food markets in the States. And they put all of their life savings and work into this farm. Their kids are sent to a school that they don't love so that they can work the land, so that they can grow as a family. And there's so many unexpected problems once you get those seeds in the ground. Putting the seed in this cup does not guarantee its success a week or a month from now, right? It's a process. And yet what's so interesting to me in the story of Minari is that in the midst of tragedy and trauma and the difficulties of growing food, the family grows together in patience and love and compassion and gentleness and self-control. They develop the fruits of the Spirit of becoming better and more active community and members. And I think that's because agriculture, as is faith, is about process, about hard work, about observation. And you see, this act of gardening of soil and soul is one that we've already seen modeled for us by God in our scriptures. According to Norman Wirzba, who wrote a great book called Food and Faith, highly recommend it, he says this: God is continually in God's garden, the creation, watering and feeding it, but also weeding and pruning it. God delights in the fruitfulness of its life just as God expresses sorrow over death or disease. God is continually watchful and alert to the dangers that can disrupt the garden's life. God is faithful even when the garden doesn't produce as planned. The true gardener then is inspired by God, who demonstrates the kind of curiosity, delight, and devotion in which no detail is too small not to be attended to. And no life is so insignificant it doesn't warrant celebration. Just like God takes meticulous care of us and helps us to grow, we do the same with our faith. What if we lived out our faith like a farmer or a gardener, attending to what we eat as if it's a spiritual exercise? What if we intended to try to plant good things in our lives and in the lives of others? And when we see that it needs to be weeded and pruned, We do the hard work of taking care of our faith. Perhaps when we look at our orchard, we have to see if it's a few bad apples or if we have a much bigger problem. And then we need to take time to reflect and make the change. Because as Jesus says in the parable in verse 9, everyone who has ears should pay attention. Do you have ears? Most likely, right? We all are encouraged to pay a careful attention to what's going on. That's what Jesus is saying when he asks this thing. Are you paying attention? Are you listening to those around you about their soils and soul? Are you putting good things in your soil so that it'll grow and grow again? Are you taking the time to look for the weeds or the bigger problems in the raised bed of your spirituality? You see, as you'll find out in this next week with your seedling, and if you were decided that you didn't want one, I'd encourage you to get one, or if you're online, go to your local garden store and try this out. I want you to use these every day as a time for reflection. It could just be a minute. Put it on a windowsill, maybe at the sink where you spend time doing your dishes, and use it as a way of asking, how do I need to take care of this plant so it'll grow good food for me? And then also, what do I need to do with myself and with my neighbor to take care of us so that we prosper, so that we model ourselves in the way that God has modeled good life and love for us? And we might have to think about, where are the bugs in our life? Where are the roots? Where are the problems? And as we attend to our spiritual gardens, we can better love God and love our neighbor. And we can do what Jesus says in the parable as we take more time to listen. We might reap a harvest that is not just one, but it might be 100 to 1 yield, 60 to 1 yield, or 30 to 1 yield. Amen.